Hi everyone. Welcome to this remake of my thesis defense presentation. We had some sound issues during the live event, and therefore the recording and also the online participation turned out to be not so useful. So for that reason, we're doing this makeup session, and I hope that you will still enjoy this presentation. So I'll be presenting to you the work I conducted for my PhD, which resulted in a thesis titled Market-Based Operation of Renewable Electrolyzer Plants. So I'll get started with the overall motivation for this work. Currently, the main efforts in decarbonizing the energy sector lies in replacing conventional power generation with renewable energy sources. And this effort combined with uh, electrification of end use of energy allows to decarbonize a large share of global greenhouse gas emissions today. However, some sectors, so-called hard-to-abate sectors, cannot be easily electrified and therefore still rely on fossil fuels. The electrolyzer is an electrochemical unit that converts power and water into hydrogen. And this hydrogen gas can be further processed into various e-fuels and chemicals, which can then replace the use of fossil fuels in those hard-to-abate sectors. So we say that the electrolyzer enables indirect electrification, and if the power that it consumes is coming from renewable sources, then it also allows for decarbonization of those hard-to-abate sectors. However, electrolyzers' widespread deployment has been limited by their high costs, and therefore this thesis sought to investigate how to lower the operational costs of the or improve the operational performance of electrolyzers through interaction with power markets. So this PhD project was funded from the HOMI project, which was a project where DTU collaborated with Siemens Gamesa Renewable Energy, and this funding came in part from the EUDP in Denmark. So through this HOMI project, we took very much a stakeholder perspective, and we worked on developing business models for this multi-energy system. This HOMI project lasted until approximately halfway through my PhD. And since then, we have tried to take more of a system perspective. And part of the work with the system perspective was conducted through or during my stay at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. I think and hope that this transition from the stakeholder perspective to more of a system perspective is apparent both in the thesis and in this presentation. So throughout this thesis, I consider an electrolyzer plant or a renewable electrolyzer plant. So this plant is renewable when the electrolyzer is co-located with some renewable energy source, where we consider a wind farm. But in general, we refer to this plant with the electrolyzer either co-located or standalone as the electrolyzer plant. So this plant can trade two products, both hydrogen and power. And in doing so, it responds to some price signals where the hydrogen price comes from some contracted fixed price, as hydrogen markets are not currently widespread and mature, while the power price comes from some power market, and it's therefore typically also time varying. And then through the start of this thesis, we looked at how to model the electrolyzer component in this electrolyzer plant for short-term electricity market participation. So that is through a scheduling problem responding to these price signals. However, when this plant is to participate in a power market, it does so by submitting a bid to the market. And therefore, in the second research direction, we look at how we can derive this price quantity bid curve for the electrolyzer plants. And then finally, when the market has cleared, the cleared outcomes will affect both the profitability of this plant and the overall connected system. And therefore, in the third research direction, we look at the short-term implications of electrolyzer plants participating in these electricity markets. So the work in this thesis and the three research directions that I presented now, they build on four publications. The first paper A was published in the proceedings of the IEEE PowerTech Conference 2023. The second paper B has been submitted to IEEE Temper and recently received a second round of revisions, and this time minor revisions. Paper C was submitted to computers and chemical engineering and was very recently accepted for publication, while the final paper D is included in this thesis as a working paper and has not yet been submitted anywhere. And I would like to take this opportunity to also say thank you to all of the co-authors and other collaborators on these publications, because all of these people have contributed significantly to these works. So thank you. So throughout this presentation, I will go through these research directions in order. So starting with the research direction 1, modeling electrolyzers, where we take the physical characteristics of this electrolyzer and formulate a scheduling problem for this electrolyzer plant. And then in the second research direction, we move from the scheduling problem to a bid curve for the plant, while in the third, we look at the implications of the bidding into power markets, both for the plant itself and for the connected system. So we'll get started with research direction 1. So repeating from before, in this first research direction, we look at the renewable electrolyzer plant. So that is co-located a wind farm and this electrolyzer. And this plant responds to price signals, a hydrogen and power price, and decides on its schedule for hydrogen export and power export. And the goal through this research direction is to formulate a scheduling problem for this plant. So naturally, the objective function of this problem is to maximize the profits of this plant, subject to some physical constraints, such as the electrolyzer capacity and the wind power availability at any time. Then, when it comes to modeling the electrolyzer, the literature tells us that two aspects should be considered when modeling electrolyzers for such a scheduling problem. And the first aspect is the operating states and transitions of this electrolyzer, which concerns, for an example, a minimum power load and a standby power consumption. And these states and transitions are known from, for an example, unit commitment problems and can similarly be modeled using binary variables. The next aspect is that the conversion efficiency of power to hydrogen in the electrolyzer is non-constant. In fact, it follows this non-linear red dashed curve that you see on the slide. And this curve can be found from empirical measurements, but it does not have any closed form expression. However, in this scheduling problem, what we express is actually the hydrogen production curve, which tells us the output hydrogen for a given input of energy. And while it looks linear, it is in fact a non-convex curve and also then nonlinear. And we derive this curve from this empirical efficiency curve. With both these binary variables from the operating states and the nonlinear hydrogen production curve, we result in a mixed integer nonlinear program for this scheduling problem if we are to capture these physical characteristics fully. So therefore, in this research direction, we asked the question if the extent to which these complexities are captured will actually impact the final scheduling results of this problem. One way of simplifying or approximating this problem is through linearizing the hydrogen production curve, and that's what I will focus on in this presentation. When we linearize this production curve, we select some points on the underlying real nonlinear curve and draw some linear segments between them, which results in a piecewise linear approximation of the curve. And therefore, we reduce the model complexity from a mixed integer nonlinear to a mixed integer linear program. Because the underlying curve is generally concave or mainly concave, this approximation is mainly an under approximation. And naturally, the more segments you add to this approximation, the better the accuracy you will have. But this comes with increased model complexity. So therefore, through this research direction, we looked at how adding more segments to this curve will impact the final scheduling results of the problem. And what we found is that we can define this ex ante metric that tells us whether or not will matter based on the day-ahead input power price considered. So looking at this histogram on the slide of day-ahead electricity prices from Denmark in 2019, what we found is that there is a range of power prices within which the level of detail, that is the number of segments on the hydrogen production curve, will impact the scheduling decision, where more segments leads to a more refined and better scheduling decision. However, outside of this range, for an example, on the lower bound, no matter how you approximate this hydrogen production curve, that is how many segments you add to its approximation, the scheduling decision will always be to maximize hydrogen production because the power price is sufficiently low. And naturally, this lower bound can be then derived from the point of lowest efficiency on the electrolyzer's efficiency curve. This point is illustrated in blue on this right side graph. And on the other end of the spectrum, if a power price is sufficiently high, no matter how you approximate this curve, the scheduling decision will be to not produce hydrogen. So this upper bound on this price range can be found corresponding to the point of maximum efficiency on this electrolyzer efficiency curve, which is marked with the red annotation on the curve. So this gives us then an ex ante metric where you can take any input power price, see if it falls within this range, and you will know whether or not a more detailed electrolyzer model will actually give you a different scheduling decision or not. And with that, we conclude research direction one, and we move to the second direction where we look at deriving the optimal price quantity bid curves for this electrolyzer plant. So, what is a bid curve? When any asset is to participate in a power market, it does so by submitting some sort of bid, and the market then outputs both the clearing prices and clearing schedules of all the participants and locations in the market. And throughout this research direction, we assume perfect competition, meaning that the participants bid truthfully. But why would you bid a curve instead of a single price quantity pair? So in general, this curve will allow any asset to express some sort of varying utility of consuming or a varying cost of producing, for an example, electricity. And in the case of the electrolyzer, this varying utility could come from this varying electrolyzer efficiency that we saw in the first research direction. Then typically markets require that these bid curves should be either monotonically increasing or decreasing, depending on whether you are a producer or consumer in the market. So for consumers, for an example, for a standalone electrolyzer into a power market, the curve should be decreasing so that the bids with the highest price or the quantities with the highest price, that is the highest utility, is cleared first in the market. If you are instead a producer, then the reverse is true, so that the bids with the lowest cost and should then be cleared first in the market. However, we look at this plant, which can be both a consumer and producer, depending, and therefore we define this hybrid curve where from the point of the market it represents a producer because it has increasing steps, but we allow for negative quantity bids to represent bids to purchase electricity. So throughout this research direction, we look at how to derive such curves for this electrolyzer plant under different to different markets and under different regulations. In general, throughout this research direction, we see that the bid curve for this plant comes from some, or can be derived from some opportunity cost in some alternative market or decision. And we define we derive three cases of bid curves where each case corresponds to the publications B through D. So in the first case, we look at the bid curve of a wind electrolyzer plant to a day-ahead power market, where the source of this opportunity cost lies in the choice between selling the locally produced power to the market and instead using this power to consume hydrogen, or to produce hydrogen. And the source of the steps or the curve on the bid curve in this case comes from the nonlinear electrolyzer physics, or the hydrogen production curve and efficiency. In the second case, we look at the bid curve of an electrolyzer providing frequency supporting reserves. So here we look at a standalone electrolyzer targeting some reserve market. And the source of the opportunity cost in this case comes from the choice between reserving capacity in this reserve market and keeping that capacity available to act freely in the day-ahead market stage. And the source of the curve in this case, again, comes from the electrolyzer physics, but we also see that the reserve market structure impacts the shape of this curve. And then finally, we look at the bid curve of an electrolyzer under renewable hydrogen regulation and uncertainty. So in this case, we consider a standalone electrolyzer that procures some guarantee of origin from a wind farm, and it aims to submit a bid to the day-ahead power market. Um, However, because it receives a subsidy whenever it's purchasing this guarantee of origin, but the wind production value is uncertain. This uncertainty is a source of both the opportunity cost and of the curvature on this final bid curve. And we will get more into that as we arrive at the case, but we will now be looking into each of these cases in order, starting with the first case, where we take the bid curve of a renewable electrolyzer plant to some day-ahead power market. So considering this co-located wind farm and electrolyzer, the plant has to consider the possible profit of producing hydrogen when it bids into the power market. And therefore, the starting point of this bid curve derivation is, in fact, the hydrogen production curve, which is this empirical curve that we saw in research direction 1. So if we were to take this curve and multiply it with the contracted hydrogen price, the resulting curve we can describe as the hydrogen revenue curve. And this curve tells us the amount of revenue that you would get from producing hydrogen for any X amount of energy consumption by the electrolyzer. From this revenue curve, we can then define the cost curve of the plant, that is the opportunity cost curve of this plant. So to find this cost, we take the consuming all the locally produced wind power for hydrogen, subtracted the resulting revenue if you instead export X amount of energy to the power market. So this curve, the resulting curve, is the cost curve of this renewable electrolyzer plant. And if we then take the derivative of this curve, we get the marginal cost curve. And this can be interpreted as a price quantity bid curve for this plant under the assumption of perfect competition. However, as you see by this final graph, it is clearly nonlinear and must therefore be approximated to comply with the market requirements as we described previously. So the goal is to achieve this curve with monotonically increasing steps, as can be seen in this lower plot. And to achieve that, we start out, instead of starting with the empirical hydrogen production curve, we start out with this approximated hydrogen production curve, which is this piecewise linear approximation, similar to what we did in research direction 1. So we start with this curve and we take the same steps as I described in the previous slide. And we end up with this marginal cost curve where the bid price, that is the height of each step, is the hydrogen price multiplied with the slope of the approximated hydrogen production curve. And in general, this curve will have 3 different cases. The first is where the wind production is exactly equal to the electrolyzer capacity. In this case, the resulting curve resembles that of a producer, but with only non-zero steps on the bid curve. If instead the wind production is greater than the electrolyzer capacity, then some of this wind power cannot be used for hydrogen production, and therefore it bears no opportunity cost for the plant. So this amount of power is then offered at a zero price to the market, to the power market. And finally, if instead the wind production is lower than the electrolyzer capacity, then we have this hybrid curve as described previously, where the negative quantity steps on the curve represent bids to purchase electricity for sufficiently low power prices. So with that, we move on to the second case. And in the second case, we look at a bid curve to a reserve market. So in this case, we consider a standalone electrolyzer, which then can produce hydrogen for some amount of consumed power. So this standalone electrolyzer trades in both the day-ahead power and the reserve markets, and it is important to this derivation that the reserve market clears before and separately of the day-ahead power market. So for some known or forecasted power price, we can compute the profit that the electrolyzer can achieve in the day-ahead market stage, so through consuming power and producing hydrogen. And this profit is equal to the revenue of hydrogen subtracted the cost of power. At some optimal quantity, this profit is maximized. That is, for some optimal consumption by the electrolyzer, the profit from consuming power and selling hydrogen is maximized. And if the electrolyzer deviates from this optimal quantity, then the resulting profit from this day-ahead market stage might be reduced. And in this lies the source of the opportunity cost of providing a reserve capacity. So this opportunity cost is computed as if the resulting profit when reserving some reserve quantity or reserve capacity X, if that profit is lower than this maximum profit that the electrolyzer could have achieved if it did not provide a reserve capacity. Essential then to this bid to the reserve market is whether or not this bid will lead to a suboptimal decision in the day-ahead power stage. And what we find is that there is therefore two important factors that impact this final bid price for the electrolyzer, and that is the reserve bid symmetry and the reserve bid duration. So the symmetry refers to whether or not a reserved capacity has to be reserved equally in both the up and down directions, and the reserve bid duration refers to for how long a bid has to be reserved for. So starting with this schedule, which tells us the schedule that maximizes the day-ahead profit for the electrolyzer, that is, when not considering any revenue from reserve provision. So if this electrolyzer is to bid into a asymmetric and 1 hour bid duration block type reserve, that is similar to, for an example, the manual frequency restoration reserve in Denmark and across Europe, if it bids into this type of reserve, then all of the capacity of the electrolyzer could be bid into either the upwards or the downwards direction without deviating from this optimal day-ahead schedule whatsoever. If now instead this reserve was symmetric while still in 1 hour blocks, then the amount of capacity that could be placed without deviating from this optimal schedule in green reduces significantly. And then further, if then the reserve has to also be provided in 4-hour blocks, which is currently the case for the frequency containment reserve in Denmark, then no capacity could be allocated without deviating from this day ahead optimal schedule. And through this, we see that the stricter the reserve structure, the higher the potential opportunity cost is for the electrolyzer, uh, because it has to deviate more from this day ahead optimal schedule to provide the reserve. And therefore, the resulting bid price also increases. And with that, we finally move to case 3, where we investigate the bid curve of an electrolyzer under renewable hydrogen regulation. So in this third case, we look at, again, a bid curve to a day-ahead power market, and we need to consider the profit that the electrolyzer could achieve from hydrogen production when we submit this bid. However, the electrolyzer in this case is subject to regulation. Specifically, we investigate the temporal matching criteria. And this criteria states that the electrolyzer can purchase guarantees of origin from some renewable energy source. And if its consumption in the day-ahead power market matches that of this guarantee of origin, then the electrolyzer can achieve a subsidy for its hydrogen production, which is given by this pie green on the slide. What does this mean? It means that when the electrolyzer does not comply with this temporal matching criteria, the resulting hydrogen production is that of gray hydrogen, that is hydrogen that does not comply with the renewable hydrogen regulation. And this gray hydrogen value from the eyes of the power market is equal to the electrolyzer efficiency multiplied with the hydrogen price. If the electrolyzer instead does comply with the temporal matching criteria, then the produced hydrogen will have a increased value. So we define this green hydrogen value as the electrolyzer efficiency multiplied by the sum of the contracted hydrogen price plus this green subsidy added on top. However, the production of this matching wind farm is uncertain at the time of bidding into this day-ahead power market, and therefore the amount of hydrogen that will have this green hydrogen value is also uncertain. This means that the uncertainty of this wind production propagates to the value of hydrogen for the electrolyzer. So now I'm gonna show you how to define this hydrogen value under uncertainty, which results in a expected hydrogen value function. So we start with this green hydrogen value. As we saw before, this green hydrogen value has this added subsidy in its function, but it's only valid until the point of production of this matching wind source. So for any consumption X that exceeds that point, instead we have this gray hydrogen value, where the subsidy is not achieved for any increase in consumption, but we have this intercept, which can be interpreted as the amount of hydrogen that already achieved the subsidy. So this gray hydrogen value function is defined for any amount of consumption X that exceeds the wind power production. So this forms this piecewise function, piecewise linear hydrogen function. And because the two linear functions form a convex hull, we can define this function taking the minimum of the two lines. And then the uncertainty in the wind production can be represented with a set of scenarios S in it's a set of scenarios S, which gives us a hydrogen value function per scenario. Um, Finally, then we can take the expected value of this hydrogen, where we take the sum over all scenarios of the probability of a scenario multiplied with the hydrogen value function of that scenario. And from these equations, we form a linear program which maximizes this expected profit. So that is the expected hydrogen value subtracted the cost of power for some consumption X. And we limit the hydrogen value function in each scenario by the green and gray hydrogen function as given by this minimum function here. And finally, we, of course, limit the amount of consumption to the electrolyzer capacity. So taking this linear program, we find a bid curve through the KKT conditions of this program. So the KKT conditions gives us a set of optimal input price, that is input day-ahead power price, and output schedule X pairs. So it tells us what combinations of price and power is optimal in this program. And these sets we can interpret to vertical and horizontal segments, which then give us which form a bid curve which maximizes the expected profit of hydrogen production. So for this example curve where we have two scenarios of wind production, the first step on this bid curve is equal to the green hydrogen value because we are practically certain through our scenario representation of uncertainty that consumption up until this point will definitely achieve the green hydrogen subsidy. If instead the amount of consumption exceeds the highest wind power scenario, then the bid price for that amount of consumption will be equal to the gray hydrogen value because we are practically certain that we will not be achieving this green hydrogen subsidy. And for the intermediate steps, as the probability of achieving this green subsidy decreases, similarly does the bid price. So that concludes the second research direction, and we will now be looking at some of the implications of the electrolyzer plant participating in electricity markets, both for the plant itself and for the connected power system. So just revisiting briefly the overall motivation for this work, while electrolyzers enable decarbonization of these hard-to-abate sectors and can be beneficial because they are flexible and controllable resources, it is not a given that it will be beneficial to the power system because that depends on how they act in the market. Through this research direction, in addition to looking at the operational profits of this plant, we are also interested in looking at how its profit maximizing behavior will impact system metrics such as the power system operational cost and resulting emissions. So again, we'll look at the cases 1, 2, and 3 for the derived bid curves as I have just presented. And in this first case, we had a bid curve to a day-ahead market for this renewable electrolyzer plant. To evaluate the impact in this case, we take the derived bid curve from research direction 2 and submit it to a simulated market clearing, which also takes the inputs of the bid curves or cost curves of all the other generators in the system, plus the input of a fixed demand quantity that is time varying. And from the simulation, we get the clearing prices and schedules of all the participants in this market. And as a case study, we use this Grid Modernization Lab Consortium reliability test system, which is a case study representing the Southwest US with a high share of renewable generation. To represent the presence of the electrolyzer, we take a pre-existing wind farm in the system and modify its cost curve to that of the renewable electrolyzer plant. And we can therefore isolate the effect of the electrolyzer in this system. And throughout this case, we compare a market bidding that is the renewable electrolyzer plant when it bids this derived bid curve, and we compare that with a fixed load electrolyzer. So that is a case where the electrolyzer is simply located next to a wind farm, but consuming a constant amount of power. So starting out, we look at the merit order of this system, and the merit order is simply all of the producers' costs or bids sorted after ascending price. And on this merit order, we plot the range of adjusted net demand through this year-long simulation that we look at. And the adjusted net demand can be understood as the range of demand that will not be covered by renewable generation. So therefore, it indicates which producers in this system should be cleared to produce if the merit order remains intact upon the solution. So we compare a lower hydrogen price renewable electrolyzer plant, which results in these bids that fall partly within this adjusted net demand range, with that of a higher hydrogen price. And in that case, the renewable electrolyzer plant generally falls outside of this adjusted net demand range. And this indicates that if the merit order is for some reason violated, for an example, due to congestion, then this generation might be scheduled to produce, but otherwise, if the merit order is not violated, the higher hydrogen price renewable electrolyzer plant will generally not be scheduled to produce power in the market, but rather to produce hydrogen. So what we see is that this higher hydrogen price then leads to the market bidding electrolyzer plant acting more like that of a fixed load electrolyzer. We see this in, for an example, the results on system cost. So looking at the change in system cost per load in the system, we see that in the case of a lower hydrogen price, the market bidding electrolyzer plant will result in a near zero increase in cost, even at a very large capacity installed. If instead this electrolyzer plant operates for a higher hydrogen price, the resulting increase is no longer zero and can not be said to be negligible, while it's still lower than those of the fixed electrolyzer case. However, we do not see that market bidding has any effect on mitigating increases in emissions from this system. So if we take a look at first a lower hydrogen price case where we compare a bidder and fixed electrolyzer case, In both cases, the resulting increase in emissions is very similar. In fact, it's actually slightly higher for the market bidding case. And the same is seen for the higher hydrogen price, that irrespective of how the electrolyzer plant is operated, if it is market participating in the bidder or if it is fixed, the resulting increase in emissions remains the same. And the reason for this lies in the fact that there is not necessarily a correlation between the cost of the generation capacity in the system and their associated emissions. So looking at the second case, we look at the electrolyzer when it participates in reserve. And in this case, we form a case study based on historical prices from Western Denmark in the years 2021 to 2023. And we, in practice, do a backtest type value analysis under perfect information of prices. What we see is that reserve participation can significantly improve the electrolyzer's profit across all the years considered. However, the source of this additional profit varies greatly between the years because of very changing price conditions in these reserve markets. For an example, in 2022, the FCR contributed significantly to a profit increase, while in 2023, the MFRR instead contributed to this profit increase the most. What we also see is that even in years where the MFRR capacity revenue is very low, the electrolyzer still bids significant amounts of capacity into this reserve. And this result is understood through the fact that we saw in research direction 2, that the MFRR reserve structure is of great benefit to the electrolyzer as it bears the lowest opportunity cost, and therefore the electrolyzer is willing to participate even at low clearing prices in this market. And finally, in the third case, we look at the bid curve of the electrolyzer, which is operating under renewable hydrogen regulation and uncertainty. And in this case, we form a case study based on Western Denmark in 2024, where we take historical wind power production and historical power prices, and we form some scenarios of wind power production based on this historical wind data. Taking the derived bid curve in research direction 2, we compare 3 cases. The first is a point forecast curve, where we take the point forecast wind production value and treat it as if there is no uncertainty connected to this value whatsoever. And in the second case, we look at a scenario-based curve, where we base this bid curve on scenarios of wind power generation that we have generated from this historical data. And finally, we compare to a perfect information curve, where the realized wind production is taken as the input to this bid curve, which is then practically an ex post analysis of this electrolyzer bidding case. So what we find in our out-of-sample results is that the point forecast bid curve leads to 91% of the possible profit, while the scenario-based bid curve leads to 95% of the possible profit, which is that of the perfect information curve. And this increase in profit of 4 percentage points comes from relatively simplistic assumptions on our scenario generation method, and we therefore hypothesize that with a more sophisticated scenario generation method, this increase could be yeah, could be increased further. So while we see here that being uncertainty aware is good for the electrolyzers' profits, what we also see is that it leads to more gray hydrogen production. So that is more production of hydrogen that cannot be that cannot be shown exposed to actually comply with this temporal matching criteria. So while we cannot conclude based on this study alone whether or not this means increased emissions from this scenario-based bidding curve, it highlights that there might be some distorting effects of uncertainty uh, when uh, to this regulation because the electrolyzer will bid in a way that maximizes its profits, not necessarily in a way that aligns the most with this criteria. So with that, we reach the conclusions and future work, starting with some conclusions. So from research direction one, we looked at electrolyzer modeling for power market participation, and what we found was that there is this price range that is power price range, wherein which the scheduling decision will be improved with increased electrolyzer and model complexity, and that this range can also be used as an ex-ante metric to decide the necessary level of model complexity based on the expected power price conditions. In the second research direction, we looked at the bid curve derivations for this electrolyzer plant to various markets and under various market regulations. And what we found was that this derivation this derivation arises from the opportunity cost that the electrolyzer plant is faced with from some alternative market or decision. And we have identified several important factors in this derivation, such as the hydrogen price, the hydrogen production curve, reserve bid structures, etc. In the third research direction, we looked at the implications of this market participation, both for the electrolyzer plant and the system. And we found that there are several benefits of market participation. For an example, we see increased profits for the electrolyzer plant throughout all the cases considered. We also see that market participation leads to lower power system operational costs, and we find that there is a high potential for low-cost reserve provisions from electrolyzers given the right reserve structures. However, we also cannot see any clear benefit in terms of avoiding emission increases based on market participation alone. So for future work, there are several directions that could be interesting to extend to. So from research direction one, we have generally neglected to look at the impact of other hydrogen system components, such as the effect of compressors. We have also neglected to take into consideration the degradation of the electrolyzer, which could have a significant impact. Further, we have generally considered a piecewise linear approximation of this hydrogen production curve, while we other convexification. In research direction two, where we derive bid curves, one interesting extension is to look at the effects of downstream hydrogen constraints, such as strict demand contracts or further processing of hydrogen. Look at the effect of these constraints on the bid curve derivation. Further, we have assumed that the hydrogen price is fixed, and it could be an interesting direction to look at the derivation of these curves as hydrogen markets develop and the plant has to bid both in hydrogen and electricity markets. Uh, Further, we have generally considered a European context to this work. So, looking at, for an example, a more US context with co-optimized reserve and energy markets could be an interesting extension. And also, there are other European bidding formats that are not explored in this thesis, such as block orders. And it could also be interesting to look at whether or not there are any benefits for the electrolyzer plants in these other bid formats. And finally, we have been risk neutral in all the derivations of these bid curves, and this could be incorporated into these problems. So finally, in the third research direction, we have generally taken a short-term perspective, while conclusions on, for an example, uh, emissions should be made only with long-term analysis. So taking the bid curves that we have derived and incorporating them into rather a long-term analysis could be an interesting and important extension of this work. Further, we have generally considered the plan to be merchant, but looking at, for an example, the effect of power purchase and hydrogen purchase agreements and the effect on both their scheduling and effect on the developed bid curves could be an interesting direction. While finally, we have also generally assumed perfect competition throughout this work, and an investigation of both the market power potential and what this bidding might look like could be an interesting future work direction. And with that, I thank you for watching. We apologize for to those who wanted to watch it live, and I'm happy to announce that even with some sound issues, it was a successful defense. So yes, thank you.